I'm going to interview Marilyn Graves. This is Kay Schlottman. Okay, March 29th, 2001. Okay, Marilyn, I sent you the material and we've had a chance to talk.
That's right.
And I wanted to know if you've been the subject of other interviews on this subject or related subjects.
No, I really haven't.
Okay. And we're to start to talk about you and your career in social work. So let's start by asking you what circumstances led you into social work as a profession, and if you could tell us a little bit about that.
Well, I didn't know that social work was a profession when I graduated from UCLA in international relations.
And that was when?
And that was in 1947. But a friend of mine, a fellow graduate, obtained a job with the Department of Public Social Service, called something as the Bureau of Public Assistance. It was called then, BPA. And it sounded kind of interesting. So I found out where to apply, and I went and applied and was employed. And I worked with them on a caseload of aid to needy children, as it was called in those days, and for about 2 years. And I realized that I really needed to know more. If I was going to be effective, I really wanted to have more skills.
What were you doing? What kind of things did you do?
Well, it was really qualifying, intake, and then follow up on qualifying people who were eligible for aid to needy children. So it was mostly, where the husband had deserted or was ill and couldn't work anymore, this type of thing.
Hi, Marilyn.
Hi.
Okay, we'll go on now.
Okay. A little bit of child placement.
In foster homes?
Yes, and which really interested me. And so with that, then I made an application to the SC School of Social Work and was accepted. And started in 1950 and graduated in 1952. And I just never, ever regretted having chosen social work as a profession.
Could you tell something about what it was like from 1950 to 52?
Yes. I don't know the size today, but we were really small. Everybody certainly knew each other in the class. And the first year, I had a placement at the Los Angeles County General Hospital with medical social service interest. And the second year, I was at Children's Bureau with foster home and foster children placement. I think perhaps at that time the emphasis was more on helping individuals within the whole context of the school.
You mean the school of social work?
Yes, school
focused
social
on
work.
individual
Focus was on individual
work.
Treatment and individual casework plans, that type of thing. And I know this has, changed and broadened now today, that there's much more of an interest on the whole community and systems within the community or the whole family, that type of thing.
Okay. And so then you got your master's in 1952, and then what did you do?
Well, my very first job was with a new agency at that time called the Altadena Child Placement Agency. And it was basically kind of a branch of the Pasadena Family Service. And the director was Elise Delafontaine, who had come from the East, had written quite a bit about family service and so forth. And it was really, I felt, an opportunity for me to learn by working under her direction.
And what did you do there?
Well, I found foster homes and placed children in foster homes mostly. There was an early part of play therapy for children, and got involved a little bit in some of that and in learning. And I forgot to tell you, though, to jump back, between my first year and my second year at the School of Social Work, I had a summer job, and I was the assistant social worker at Camp Pybeka, which is a part of the Crippled Children Society's program. And so, along with this, as I was finishing my first year with the Altadena Child Placement Agency, they kept asking me to come to work for them. And I talk about changes. In those days, social workers made next to nothing. I think I was getting $195 a month at the Altadena Child Placement Agency.
All right, so you were making $195 a month with
Right.
The Altadena program.
And the Crippled Children Society offered me, I think, $250 a month. It was a little closer to home. And I had liked the people that I had met when I'd worked there that summer. And also I had really had a deep feeling about helping the children with disabilities. It was mostly a child caseload at that time. And I felt there was much hope and many things that could be done. And so I went to work for them on April 1st, 1953. And as you probably know, I retired October 15th, 1998. But I held many positions within the agency during that time.
Yeah, so maybe that would be a good way to sort of proceed. If you give a rundown of those various positions you had, which led to your ultimately being the president of the agency.
Yeah. All right, well, when I started out, I was a social worker. I worked with the speech pathology department and with the camping department. So it involved intake interviews, picking up and helping families with towards resources, and then the follow-up from camp, children that we discovered with problems that needed to have more follow-up, and that type of thing. I did that till about a year and a half, and then the agency opened its first satellite office, which was out in the West San Fernando Valley, where there was not a lot of population at that time. And I became the director of what was called Rancho del Valle. And it was a really exciting opportunity as far as I was concerned to work, to develop programs that could be meaningful to people with disabilities. There was a pretty open field to do what you thought might be workable in a professional way. So, believe it or not, I started out with 4 clients, 4 kids, on this 5-acre old farmhouse. And
what programs did you offer?
Well, speech pathology was our very first program because the agency had a very good department, and they assigned a speech therapist who came out and then was in full-time after a while. They had a swimming pool, and we finally got together a very good swimming program. And because we didn't have very much money, we ran most of it with volunteers.
And this was offered for just children with disabilities?
Well, children and adults could come into. We had adult swimming, and then one of the programs that turned out to be really effective was what we called family swimming on the weekend. And the person with a disability could bring their whole family swimming. And this had a lot of comfortable ways for families to get to know each other, see other people with disabilities, how they coped or didn't cope. It was a time that they felt comfortable to speak to me about problems that they just didn't mobilize to call me on the telephone about. And they learned from one another. And as I said, this was interesting to me in that we had volunteer certified swim instructors who ran the program. And I just have to say this one thing about volunteers at this point. Out of this, a lot of interesting things happened, but I want to tell you about one man who came to volunteer, and he was an engineering major at Cal State Northridge. And changed his, out of this experience, changed his direction and became a orthopedist for children. And it was all out of being a volunteer in the swim program. So I have a lot of stories like that, but it's just very exciting to me what can happen with volunteers in this great opportunity.
So how big a staff did you have then at this center that you opened?
I just remembered I then started a preschool group of children with speech problems. And so we had an assistant program person, a speech pathologist, myself, and a maintenance person, because that 5 acres with the swimming pool was a lot to take care of.
Sounds like you must have been working 7 days a week.
Well, I was. I also started a program for young adults with disabilities. And these were young people who had been through the public school system, what was offered in special education, and were just sitting at home. And so every Thursday they came for a day, and it turned out to be one of those great programs where we started, none of them spoke to one another, only to me. And as we developed, they planned their own activities, talked to each other on the phone during the week, and the parents came to depend on this a great deal. So if anything ever interrupted this program, it was very traumatic as far as the parents were concerned, because that was their day to be able to do some other things.
Now, this was before the big impetus in special education.
Oh, yes. I think, let me do mention that this was in the late 50s, early 60s. And interest in special education came from the Kennedy administration, who were interested in more services for people with disabilities. So that at that time, many of folks in special ed didn't start until they were 8, and their education ended when they were 16. So then they had nothing but just being at home, and this isolation, or just the relationships of being so close with family and no one else, really were probably not as healthy as they should be.
Well, you really have seen a lot of changes, right?
Yes, I'm telling about it, yes. So anyway, out of this, on the property, was an old barn. And, I mean, truly a barn with stalls and so forth. And the agency as a whole ran what was called a sheltered workshop in their downtown office. And it seemed to me that many of the people in my Thursday program would be able to do some work. So again, because of volunteers, we set up the barn into a small sheltered workshop. We had a volunteer director, a woman who worked every day.
Was that a paid staff?
She was not a paid staff.
Oh.
She was a volunteer, Esther Reed. And then a fellow dropped by who had polio, and he worked with one of the small part manufacturing for missiles and that type of thing. And this was just beginning to be a big business in the San Fernando Valley. And he had a job that he felt the people in our program could do. And it was basically packaging small electronic hardware, and which they did. And because it was subsidized isn't the right word, but it was under a contract from the Defense Department, why we were able to put into the hourly wage, and they were paid at a true hourly wage and not just at a minimum for people with disabilities, 25 cents an hour at that time.
People with disabilities were being paid 20?
According to sheltered workshop rates for
I
people with
see.
disabilities were 25 cents an hour. But this contract, because it was out of the Defense Department, they were able to make, according to whatever they did, more money if they could, handle it.
Well, how was the agency being supported during those years?
A very important part of this. The agency was a part of the National Easter Seal Program. And
so that was true when you started in 1952?
That was true when I started. And basically the program came from a direct mail program, basically, of soliciting, the Easter Seal Program. In those days, the Los Angeles City Social Service Department only let agencies solicit during 1 month of the year. So the Easter month belonged to the Crippled Children Society, February belonged to the Heart Association, and everybody had a month. And then just to share, United Way had the fall, and then we were not supposed to solicit any money at all during the United Way campaign. So the income was very small, and it came in dollar bills and $5 bills and this type of thing. And as I said, a lot of volunteers. And of course, wages were not very high. So that's how they kind of got along. Now, there were some things, some support groups started. I'll mention a couple because they are still functioning in some fashion. And one of them was a group called the Gold Diggers. And they, their husband has been active in the agency and on the board. And they formed a support group, did a lovely fashion show every year, and then the money was used to buy things mostly for the camp, not for the different centers.
The camp was already in existence. So.
Camp started in 1947, yeah.
Okay. That was Camp Pybeka, where
That
you...
was Camp Pybeka. Camp Joan Meyer wasn't open until, I remember, around 1960, I think Camp Joan Meyer was open.
So you got mail campaign money and these luncheons?
These luncheons and support groups. And somewhere in there, Easter Seals didn't want you to be a part of the United Way. So we joined with some other agencies in something that was called AID. And they solicited employees at work for, and it turned out to be mostly all the health agencies, cancer, heart, lung, this type of thing. So we were getting a little money from them, and I can't remember how much, but, comparably speaking, it helped. And then an occasional service group would give us some money. And the other thing that has happened to this agency over the years, and we can get into it more, is out of the blue, somebody would have remembered us in their will. It wasn't a planned program. It wasn't anything that we knew about particularly. But this would happen occasionally, and it would, save the day, as always. And so that was about our income sources.
And did the people who received the services pay any fees, or?
No. Everything was given without fees.
And was that Easter Seals' direction, or was it the board's?
Yeah, I think it was both. I think the philosophy from the Easter Seals was always that they were there to serve people with disabilities. And our board was that way, and they didn't want to get into any fees, they didn't want any government money, because they wanted to be able to do that which they thought was meaningful for our population that we were serving. So in fact, later on, they had a really, really, really difficult time taking government fees for service. And of course today, that's a good part of the income, or was certainly at the time I left, it's around 51, 52% of the income.
So, and then you mentioned this workshop you started where you got a contract from one of the defense companies, and then they started paying the people who did this work for them. And
we had also some Jack-built toys. I can just remember these things. And we assembled little plastic toys also.
And you got paid for that.
And we got paid for that.
I mean, then the workers got paid.
The workers got paid, yeah. Right.
So that was somewhere in the 60s then. So how long were you at the center in Woodland Hills?
Yeah, I was at the center in Woodland Hills around 10 years, just about 10 years.
Until the mid-60s?
Yeah.
And did the little project, the workshop in the barn, continue?
Oh, yes. Today it's a thriving workshop in a lovely new building. And they had to tear down the old barn, as the city planners come around and all those people. Which reminds me, I just have to tell you this little bit about this 5-acre piece of property that about 1958 or 59, the agency was feeling a need to establish a second camp. And their emphasis, because there were a lot of children at that time with congenital heart defects, and they couldn't go to the mountains, and then some other kinds of physical things for kids who couldn't take the altitude.
So Camp Pybeka is in the mountains? Camp
Pybeka is up in the San Bernardino Mountains near Crestline, and it's about a mile high. So they started, before they found what was going to be Camp John Meyer, they ran a camp in the back acres of Rancho Del Valle. And we set up tents, and the old caretaker's house on the property was the kitchen, and also where the nurse stayed. And we put in a cement slab and covered, and then screened in a canvas roof, and that was the dining hall. And they stayed in tents, which I have to admit to you were a little warm in San Fernando Valley. But along came the planning department and said, "Ooh, we don't like your plan very much." So we did it for 2 years, and by that time, the agency, a lovely volunteer board member, Joan Meyer, and her husband, Harry Meyer, basically, said they would buy some property out in Malibu, right along the ocean. And their only concern was that we would call the camp in honor of Joan Meyer. And so that was how we moved from Rancho to Camp Joan Meyer.
And when did they really open Camp Joan Meyer?
Camp Joan Meyer really opened in 1960.
And that was for the cardiac. And then people with
and then,
other disabilities.
Our population was growing. I mean, the population of Los Angeles area was growing so much. And so there were just more kids. It wasn't that disability was more or less, but it was just there were more.
And was the agency growing at the same time in terms of reaching out to other communities?
Yes.
You said that Woodland Hills was the first.
Woodland Hills was the first. Long Beach was the second. They'd always had a really interest in Long Beach.
And so you developed the agency developed.
In Claremont. Claremont. We had a small center in Claremont. Those were the first. And then later on, Pasadena, and then East Los Angeles, and the Inglewood area.
So, and all this was being done with just this source of funding you're talking about, direct mail, aid,
right, and the money to build and all was coming mostly from wills and bequests.
And was there?
And some of there are some things that if you visit any of the sites, you'll see things that gift of the Gold Diggers or gift of the Rotary Club, where they would give enough money to build a cabin or some of the sites.
Okay, so then you mentioned that you were affiliated with Easter Seals during all these years. And when did that change?
December 6th, 1971, and this came about because you've been asking me about money, and as this agency was growing, why the money coming in wasn't enough to do what they wanted to do and, to meet the needs. So they wanted to make another arrangement with the National Easter Seal program whereby for all metropolitan areas where the growth was across the nation was growing, that they would make a different financial arrangement with it so that more of the money that was raised would stay in the community.
What you were having to send?
Well, we had to send, I call it a franchise, but we had to send a certain percentage to national.
But were you getting services from national?
We were getting some services for national, but the board and the executive director at that time didn't feel that they really were of that much value. And they felt that the staff at the agency was very professional, that there were other places where they could pick up their professional training background, that kind of thing. And that Easter Seals wasn't offering that to them. I mean, wasn't anything that great. So anyway, they spent a year or so trying to negotiate, and finally the board voted that they would break away and become an independent agency.
Did that create a lot of conflict among the board, or?
Well, the board was very solid. There were just a few folks who didn't think it was too good an idea. And always in this type of thing, some things are positive and some things aren't. For example, we lost all the national publicity. That's something that I think really was a big loss. And also there were a lot of national kinds of contacts. I'll give you an example. Earlier on, because of national, they had made a contact with a woman who was the treasurer of the United States, Ivy Baker Priest. And then when she moved to Los Angeles, she became a part of the board, this type of thing.
She became a part of?
The Crippled Children Society board.
Oh, I see.
Here. And people, of really national stature, I think we lost the contact with them because many of them wanted to do it on a national basis and not just a local basis. On the other hand, we saved a lot of money with not having to go to meetings and that type of thing, and we could, put that into directions for our service.
Then that relationship was severed in 71, and so the agency then was independent.
Independent agency. We one of the things we did, but we were able to do, thank goodness, was to qualify for become a health agency under the United Way wing, and that was more productive for us. It really brought in a fair amount of income that we could rely on, and it also gave us some standards for operating the agency, and some prestige, I think, for saying that we were a health agency under the United Way.
Then the United Way gave you some financial support.
Yeah. And there were a lot of other things that happened that helped us. I want to say flow at the time, but as always, programs change and directions change, and we were able to make our decisions from a professional standpoint here in the Los Angeles area.
And did it bring about some changes in your ability to offer services and in the way your board operated, or?
Well, one of the things I think I mentioned before was we realized that we really needed to take in fees for service. Not only private fees, but qualify for government fees and government grants. And this is really harder on the board than breaking away from Easter Seal.
Well, tell about that, yeah.
And
so when did that start, that you began to charge and got government funding?
It started in the late 70s, so there was a gap of time in there, but it started in the late 70s. And it was also part of what was happening on the state level in funding, that parents had been very successful, I think, in California, in getting the legislature to
um, provide funds for special needs children. And one of the things always, way back when, is they started providing transportation for kids to go to school. So we picked up at home and taken them to school and brought back again. And this made, a lot of differences for a lot of people. But also then they provided other services, after-school care, respite care, camping. Many of our programs, our work training programs, all qualified for what was called regional service, Big California Regional Services.
Years?
Oh, yes, a lot. When I started, it was right at the middle, maybe, of the polio epidemic. It was severe in this area. And so many of the young people in our program had residual effects from polio. Also,
Make some more comments.
All right. One of the other things I wanted to mention is that throughout the years, it's been advised to many social agencies that they not participate in political advocacy. Sort of a threat that this could ruin their nonprofit status, that type of thing. And as a result, the board, certainly the agency, was very nervous about anything that had to do with any kind of a political influence on legislation and so forth. And so it took a lot of helping them understand that sometimes it wasn't influence, but it was just education, helping them to understand the problem and informing legislators, bureaucrats, etc., of what the needs were and why these were important. And this comes up when I was thinking about something that's quite current at the moment, and that's aides, the people who are employed to help people with disabilities so they can be at home or can manage at home. And they're paid a very low wage and no benefits. And so there's been a lot of advocacy on their behalf, and hopefully this is going to come through with a little better respect in terms of benefits and so forth for them. But I think that as a whole, some things, even I'll use the other example, is the whole idea of accessibility. And again, some people thought this was lobbying, but it was more education, helping people understand if you're in a wheelchair or using an aid to move, that you can't, you can't, if you've got steps you can't manage, well then you can't do that. You can't go to the library or you can't go to church. These just preventing. And so I think there's been some real movement across the nation and in California of accessibility and accommodating people. And I suppose this is a good time for me to mention that for the last 16 years, why I have been a chair and then a member of the State Department of Rehabilitation Appeals Board. And this frequently comes up in terms of employer accommodation to a handicap or of where services have not been available so the person could be rehabilitated and get back or try to be within the workforce. Prior to that, I also served on the advisory committee for the State Department of Rehabilitation. And again, it was looking at all these issues. There were more people with disabilities because of the population growth, and these issues became personal to a lot of people. Either they had a problem themselves or someone in their family did, and they began to realize these things are important. Accessibility is important. Accommodation is important, that type of thing.
And then you worked with the city on some commission.
Yes, I was on the, it was the same kind of thing that brings me back. is the Mayor's Committee for the Handicapped. And I was on that about 10 years. And one of their thrusts that I think was fairly successful was making parks and public recreation areas accessible to people with disabilities. Everything from getting matting on the grass so you could roll your wheelchair across to putting in new equipment that people with disabilities could use, and even making some of the tables and chairs available rather than just the picnic style, having a round one so the wheelchair could get into the table, that type of thing.
And so this group was instrumental
in affecting these types of things, yes.
curb cuts and...
Yes, curb cuts were among it. And I think some places now they even have some talking signals for people who are blind. You know, so you can push this braille one and it says the light is green, you may walk, that kind of thing.
So, what, as you look back on your long career, what significant changes have you observed between social work practice when you entered the field and today?
Yeah, there's a lot more people who are concerned about social issues. And there's a lot more being offered throughout all the systems. And whether it's local or state or national, there's just, people really are concerned about housing or, not our field, but I'll use this, the fact that when people are homeless, looking for answers for the, and also I think more of a respect for people in need, that they understand that this can happen and that people do need services and these services can be helpful. And there's much more of a positive feeling, I think, as a whole.
So social work practice. Well, you mentioned something early in the interview. When you entered the field, there was a much greater focus on
the individual. You had a caseload of so many people, and you had to make sure that all the things were done for those people, but you weren't looking at a whole system. It's that there isn't enough child care, or this child shouldn't be home and isolated. They should be in school with other boys and girls, that kind of thing. So there's a much of a broadening of services.
And then I was to ask you if you had any personal papers, pamphlets, or items that could be made available.
I'll have to look and see. I thought afterwards that maybe I might have some things from the days of the Easter sales that might be interesting. And I've already given the Camp Pybeka 50th anniversary booklet that they put out. I'm sure I have some other things too, and I'll give them to you if I get mobilized.
Well, you've had a long and illustrious career, Marilyn, that is for sure.
It was very interesting. I enjoyed the whole experience.
You started out as a social worker and you ended up running an agency. What was the budget when you...
All right, well, let's talk about that. The agency grew a lot. When I started as president in 1979, the budget was about $1.5 million. And when I retired in 98, it was about $7 million. And that was what I always said, you have to start from scratch every year and raise that much money just to run the agency.
Yes? Okay.
The other thing was the staff, the growth of the staff. It was down to around 60 employees in '79, and we had around 130, 140 full-time employees and about 60 part-time employees plus our summer staff. by 1998. And then our facilities, too, had grown. Not only our housing, which was a whole new extension of services, but as I mentioned earlier, our programs in Orange County had been developed. And so that there was continued kind of growth going on. And one of the other things that I think is important, and I just don't know any other place to put this in, but we haven't talked about it, and that was the fact that the agency was very committed to diversity. And this came from an early president of the board of directors, Don Belding, who right after the Watts riots began to perceive that Los Angeles really was changing, and any social agency had to be working with that and serving people right there who needed this help. And in fact, this is one of the factors toward our ending our relationship with the Easter Seals, was this fact that we wanted to open an agency in East Los Angeles and a branch in South Central Los Angeles, but ended up being Inglewood later on. And we always put in a lot of time and effort into developing the programs in the community so that our services were available to everybody, really.
Mm-hmm. Okay, well, is there anything else that you think that you might have forgotten as we conclude this interview?
Well, there's so many things. I'm not sure that I've got everything in there. I suppose I really ought to mention just a little something about boards of directors. And throughout the years, this agency, which was really developed by LA Rotary Club way back in 1926, had at the beginning some very caring individuals who part of it, I think, was their affiliation with Rotary. Lawrence L. Frank, Paul Dietrich, Don Belding that I mentioned. There's a lot of people who had a lot to do with LA's development as a whole, but that's another whole story. And they were very caring about the programs and about the services that were given to the disabled. And I can remember Mr. Frank, his pictures, Mr. Frank visiting camp, playing games with the campers with disabilities, and just really being a part of the scene, but what you call a benevolent chairman of the board. And he brought in many of his friends who shared his same philosophy. Then we began to grow and change in all the things that were happening professionally in terms of how boards are developed. Not only diversity, but geographically. You couldn't have all your core people just from one area. And I think that this is still a whole area of transit. I don't think there's any real answer to what makes the board, how the board is developed, how you help them learn, how they keep up with what's happening in the world professionally, and that there's still a lot of things to be worked through in terms of any agency and their board of directors. And this is something I would say to the future probably to take more study and learning.
So your early members were on the board a very long time then?
Very long time, basically almost until they died. And there was very little changeover in terms of this. I can think of one individual who represented one of the sorority groups, and she was the corporate secretary for maybe 25 or 30 years, that type of thing. So, and now this changes, and there isn't that advantage, the pros and the cons. You want the new life, and you want the new thinking, and you want the new blood, but you also need the tradition and the history and the real attachment to the program and the services.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's very interesting, a very interesting comment. Well, thank you, Marilyn.
That's been my pleasure.
If other things come to your mind after we've finished this, I won't be turning this in for a while, so we can get together again.
All right. Okay.
Okay.
That sounds great.